As I hinted at in the close of the last video, what you're about to see will take you beyond understanding inflation and straight into the truth behind it. This isn't just history, it's the origin of a plan whispered into existence in secrecy and darkness over 100 years ago. It was designed to outlive generations and to bleed nations dry. A plan that today dominates the entire global financial system. Its aim was clear from the very beginning: to quietly siphon wealth from the many to the few who control the system. Some of what you'll see will change your perspective forever. And if you choose to keep watching, understand this: you are ignoring a very real warning. You don't need to see this. You already have enough knowledge to win with the wealth forces instead of being crushed by them. What I'm about to show you might come as a shock, especially if you've never questioned how our financial system really works. And for those of you who think you already know most of how the system works, this video will fill in the missing pieces and complete the picture. Because inflation, it's not an accident, it's manufactured. And the uncomfortable notion that America's system is for the people by the people will give way to a new uncomfortable truth: that the American financial system was built to extract from the people in service of an out-of-control government and the banking cartel who stands behind it. Deep down, you've probably always known something was off, but maybe you never looked at it head on. Like a monster under the bed, you've learned to live with it. Today, we're going to drag that monster into the light. This monster has a name. It's known as the Creature from Jekyll Island. And if you're ready to look at it square in the eyes and see the most powerful and devious plan ever created to steal from the American people under the banner of safety, security, and manufactured inflation, then join me for this 5-act docuseries. Act number 1, the birth of a secret monster. 6 men representing a quarter of the world's wealth boarded a train with no records, no last names. To the world, they were duck hunters. That was their cover story, at least. But in reality, they were hunters of something much, much deeper: the wealth of nations. Behind closed doors, they were building a bank, a private one, with the power to create money out of thin air, lend it to the government for a fee, and collect interest on every single dollar in circulation. This was the origin of the modern banking system, the birth of global finance as we know it today, and the moment inflation was baked into the economy by design. It's not speculation, my friends, this isn't theory. It's a documented conspiracy, a factual account of how your savings are siphoned and how every boom and bust for the last century has been engineered to move wealth from the poor and the middle class to the richest few in America. So let's start with November 1910. The train heads south to Jekyll Island, Georgia, a private resort owned by none other than J.P. Morgan himself, the most powerful banker at the time. For 9 days, behind locked doors in Morgan's mansion, the most powerful bankers, politicians, and world leaders designed the Federal Reserve, a central bank that the American people would never knowingly vote for. The mission of the central bank was clear. Number 1, form a banking cartel to control credit and currency. Number 2, disguise it as government institution for the people. And number 3, use fear from the panic of 1907. When the collapsing copper prices triggered bank runs and a national liquidity crisis as emotional leverage to sell the public on the need for stability. The trip and the need for secrecy was coordinated by J.P. Morgan, using the crisis as the cover to push through a plan that would forever change America's money. The result was the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. The Federal Reserve Act wasn't passed, it was smuggled into law under the cover of Christmas. It was rushed through Congress just 2 days before Christmas Eve, when most of the lawmakers had already gone home to their families. It slipped into existence while the nation was distracted. It was wrapped in the language of progress and safety. It promised the stability that Americans craved. But beneath the gift wrap was a weapon sold as protection, but designed for complete servitude. And stability, well, that was only the marketing pitch, because beneath the reassuring words lay the very scheme that J.P. Morgan and his co-conspirators had crafted in secrecy on Jekyll Island on that day. A plan designed not to protect the public, but to secure the power and profits for the creators and inside operators of this brand newly formed banking system. It was the deceitful beginning of a system that has robbed literally millions of dollars, probably billions and even trillions of dollars through carefully engineered wealth transfers from the bottom all the way up. A system never designed to free the people, but to bind them. This bill socialized losses through the government while privatizing gains through the banking systems for the very institutions causing the instability. That bill and the creation of the Federal Reserve set the stage for 2008, the meltdown that wiped out millions of people, while the same banks that created the bubble, they were bailed out by taxpayers, then paid themselves billions of dollars in bonuses. Before 1913, the Constitution was really clear. Only Congress could coin money. But the Federal Reserve Act, well, it changed everything. It handed the power to create money to private banks, literally from nothing, and charging the American people interest for the privilege of just using the money. It was the perfect system of voluntary servitude. The deeper people went into debt, the richer the banks became. And behind it all, working hand in hand, was the US government with the Federal Reserve. Now, don't be fooled by its name. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It's privately owned and privately operated. It has no reserves, only the legal authority to print money on demand, backed by nothing but the government's promise to collect future taxes. Now listen, I know this sounds complex, even conspiratorial. That's by design. The secrecy, the complexity, it's intentional. It keeps Americans in the dark about what's really happening behind the scenes. Inflation isn't an accident, it's the plan. And if you think I'm exaggerating, watch this. Here's Jared Bernstein, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, the man advising former President Joe Biden on the economy and the use of the very monetary system. Here, he is struggling to explain how the system works. He himself doesn't understand the levers that he's pulling.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to, I guess I can't really talk, I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about, because it's like the government clearly prints money, it does it all the time, and it clearly borrows, otherwise we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
As you can see, even many at the top, they're pawns in this game. They know how to pull the levers to solve their own short-term problems with printed money, but often they have no grasp of the deeper design. A design which every new dollar created quietly transfers wealth from the unknowing to the knowing, siphoning not just money, but futures and freedom at the same time. This brings us to Act 2, the magic trick, how money really works. What they built on Jekyll Island, it wasn't really a bank. It was a machine for theft. Listen, it prints money from thin air and it binds Americans to that machine, to the monetary system forever, or at least as long as we're using the dollars backed by the US government. The more money they create, the more was stolen through the concept of inflation. With the full backing of the US government, this machine appeared legitimate. But in truth, it was backed only by your labor. Taxpayers tricked into believing that they live in a free system. Here's how it works. The Federal Reserve, they create new dollars and lend them to the government at an interest rate. From the moment each dollar is born, it is already in debt. Today, our money is literally debt because it's created from debt from the very beginning. Today, our currency is literally government-backed IOUs. And when we say government-backed, that means you're backing them. Your labor, your taxes are backing debt instruments. No gold, no production, just a keystroke and an endless stream of money to fuel Washington spending while draining your future. Author G. Edward Griffin exposed the truth behind the creation of the Federal Reserve and the role that they play in deceiving the American people, in charging them and stealing from their future by creating money out of nothing. He called this system the Mandrake Mechanism, named after a comic strip magician who could make people see whatever he wanted. And that's exactly what this system does. It makes you believe that money is real, while quietly siphoning away your wealth, your future, and your freedom. The illusion that they've sold us is they tell you that new money is free and it's good for the economy. They give it noble names like stimulus, aid, and quantitative easing. But every new dollar steals from the ones you already have, quietly draining your savings through inflation. And that's why inflation isn't just an economic problem, it's immoral. It robs you of the value of your labor. If you can't store your labor in the form of money, you will work until the day that you die. And here's the real sleight of hand. The official definition of inflation is simply the rise in prices. That's the effect, not the cause. It's like describing a fever without mentioning the infection. It's not an accident. When people are confused, they blame the wrong things. The rich, the corporations, politicians, pandemics, anything but the real source of real inflation, the creation of new money. And that mechanism, that deceit, that's the point. Deceit is the most dangerous theft of all because it robs you of your ability to choose. Economist Milton Friedman said it plainly. He said inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. In other words, if you don't understand the cause of inflation, you can never fight it. And this is why presidents and Congress never talk about the cause. They only talk about the symptoms. Prices are up? Well, we better tax the rich. Economic slowdown? We'll print more money. Each solution treats the effect while making the cause that much worse, ensuring that the next crisis will be even that much bigger and that much harder to deal with. And it gets worse from here. Before 2020, banks could lend out at a 10-to-1 ratio, meaning for every dollar that you deposited, they could lend out 9 more that they didn't actually have. That's the essence of fractional reserve banking, made possible by the Federal Reserve. They lend far more money than they hold in reserves. Before 2020, they were required to keep 10% on hand. But since that time, the reserve requirement has dropped to effectively zero. That means if too many people walked into a bank today and demanded their money back at the same time, it wouldn't actually be there. The bank would collapse within a few hours. And you might ask yourself, well, why would a bank want to keep so little in reserves? Well, banks aren't in business to serve you, they're in business to serve themselves. The more money they can take and lend out, the more money they make, and it doesn't really matter if you lose money along the way. Because when that happens, if a bank defaults, the Federal Reserve, they swoop in, the same entity that created the money in the first place, and they bail them out. And how do they do that? Well, you guessed it, by creating more money, which only accelerates inflation. We all sort of know this on some level, but we play along because we were born into a system that we were taught to never question. We're told this is just how it works. But underneath all of this is a scheme designed to quietly siphon money, quietly siphon wealth away from the unaware to the aware. And just to rub it in, every time you make a deposit, they hand you a little sucker. Usually it's called a dum-dum. What looks like a symbol of customer service is really just mockery hiding in plain sight. Because in their game, you and I and anyone who's using the banking system as a consumer, well, my friends, you're the sucker. And in 2023, the trick, it was in full display. When Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, depositors panicked and they rushed to pull their money out. But it wasn't there. The bank didn't have it because under the rules of the system, they never really do. The Federal Reserve and the US government swooped in, not by pulling cash from a vault, but by creating it digitally and instantly to protect depositors. And just like that, billions of new dollars flooded into the system, quietly diluting the value of the money in your pocket. The banks were saved, the players at the top were profited, everyone else lost money, but those who were operating the system, well, they were protected. And the cost of all of this, well, it's quietly handed it to you and I through new money created in the name of bailouts. Always to preserve the system, always to protect the confidence. But the price is the same. Inflation that eats your savings for years to come. The one inescapable truth behind this insidious creature is this. Inflation, it's not an accident, it's the plan. Today, inflation in the modern times is presented as a healthy part of a thriving, abundant economy. It's conditioning you to believe that inflation is natural. Yet every round of money printing makes life harder. It forces you to work longer for less while falling further and further behind. Frustration builds, and when it does, politicians, they swoop in, they make promises to fix it, they raise taxes on the rich, there's more regulation, there's bigger stimulus checks, it feels like relief. But every solution only accelerates the problem. Now that you've seen the trick, the sleight of hand that pulls wealth from your pocket without you ever feeling the hand slip inside, it's important that you understand this. This isn't bad policy or incompetence on the government side. It's a system engineered from the start to funnel wealth and your money upward, from the many who work to earn money to the few who control it. And this brings us to the part that they never want you to understand, because if you knew the full truth, how the money supply, interest rates, and credit cycles are deliberately manipulated, you'd see the next crisis before it ever happens. This brings us to Act 3, engineering economic crashes. The deeper you dig into our economy, the harder it is to shake the truth. Booms and busts, they're not random, they're engineered. The blueprint is actually pretty simple. Loosen credit and flood the market with cheap money. Fuel a speculative boom, drive prices far beyond reality, then tighten the screws. Restrict credit and trigger a collapse. Then once you do that, buy it all back for pennies on the dollar. Almost immediately after the Federal Reserve was created, the crash of 1929 happened. This was the first major test of the Federal Reserve. To the public, the outsiders looking in, it looked like a catastrophic failure. But now that you're beginning to understand why the Fed was really created, you can see it from their perspective. The crash of 1929, in fact, was a resounding success for those who were pulling the levers. Here's how it all went down. In the Roaring '20s, the Fed kept interest rates artificially low, and credit started flowing freely. Ordinary Americans, your grandparents, were encouraged to borrow and speculate in the stock market. Leverage was insane. People could buy $10,000 of stock with only $1,000 down. Prices soared and wealth looked endless. But then in 1928, the Federal Reserve, they reversed course. They hiked interest rates sharply, choking off credit. The market began to crack. Insiders who had been warned quietly got their money out, and by October 1929, the bottom fell out. Stocks crashed nearly 90% over the next 3 years. Millions lost everything. Banks failed by the thousands. Families lost homes, farms, and businesses. But for the elite, the very people who had helped engineer the boom and the bust, it was a massive buying opportunity. In fact, an opportunity of a lifetime. They scooped up land, companies, and assets at fire sale prices. Here's a couple of examples. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., father of JFK, shorted the market before the crash. Then he used the wreckage to buy up distressed assets for pennies. While ordinary Americans lined up at soup kitchens, Kennedy walked away massively wealthy. And the irony of all of this? A few years later, FDR appointed him as the first chairman of the SEC, the very agency meant to police this kind of speculation that he had personally profited from. The Morgans and the Rockefellers also capitalized on this crisis. JP Morgan's bank and its successors consolidated massive amounts of failed banks and companies, tightening up their grip on American finance. The Rockefeller interests, they expanded their empire by scooping up oil, utility, and banking assets at rock-bottom prices. Ordinary Americans lined up for bread, while insiders feasted on bargains. Out of the ashes, the empire grew larger than ever, because every crisis strengthens the creature, and each wreckage point brings more control, new agencies, deeper ties between banks and Washington, and a public more willing to surrender freedom in exchange for the illusion of security. This brings us to the crash of 2008. This cycle has repeated itself over and over since 1929. Each boom and bust crashes the markets, but not the insiders' balance sheets. In fact, they profit. Meanwhile, everyone else loses ground. It replayed in 2008. Reckless lending, exotic securities, Wall Street greed, and when the collapse hit, taxpayers, they were forced to bail out the same executives who caused it, reinforcing the power of the system, the structure, making those who are running it even more wealthy. This subtly reinforced the truth to Americans that the money system, it's meant for them, not you. And when they break it, it's our responsibility to bail them out, to reward them, and hope somehow after the reward we just gave them that they don't do it again. The bottom line is this: bailouts reward bad actors. Goldman Sachs, while selling toxic mortgage-backed securities to their clients, they were secretly betting against those very same securities. When the housing market collapsed, Goldman walked away with billions of dollars in profit, while their clients were wiped out. The bailouts, they weren't there to save Main Street. Those bailouts were meant to protect Wall Street. Citigroup, Bank of America, AIG, and several others, they took hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer relief and turned around and then paid out their executives billions of dollars of bonuses. In 2009 alone, the 9 biggest banks, they paid their executives $32.6 billion in bonuses, just months after being rescued with taxpayer money. These messages were clear. Recklessness in the pursuit of profits are rewarded. And if something breaks at the top, the Fed and the government, they're going to swoop in and they're going to bail out those institutions that are deemed too big to fail at the expense of the American taxpayer. For ordinary Americans, the crash meant foreclosures, lost jobs, and shattered retirement accounts. For the elites, it was business as usual. But to fully understand why these crises keep happening, we have to rewind back to 1971. Before that year, the US dollar, it was backed by gold. On paper, the money supply was anchored to something real. You could trade a $20 paper bill for $20 worth of precious metals. That limit kept the system somewhat in check. But here's the twist with that reality. For decades before Nixon's move, it had already been illegal for Americans to own most forms of gold. In 1933, the government forced citizens to turn in their gold and conduct business only in the US dollar. That meant by the time the dollar was backed by gold, the average American couldn't actually touch that gold. It was locked away in government vaults. In 1933, Americans were forced to surrender. They had to surrender their gold, their sovereignty, their ownership of a real asset, and live only on dollars, trust in a system. By 1971, when Nixon severed the dollar from gold, the stage was set. Overnight, money stopped being money. It became currency instead, backed by nothing but debt and the government's promise to tax in the future. From that day forward, there was no limit to how much could be created, and create they did. This brings us to Act 4, the scoreboard manipulation. In 1971, well, everything changed. When President Nixon closed the gold window, they were introduced to something new. Now, it was packaged as if it were a natural, even a healthy part of a modern economy, and it was called inflation. For decades before, the dollar was relatively steady. A gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, a gallon of gas, they didn't change much year to year. Savers, they were actually winners. You could set money aside, confident that it would hold its value and secure the same standard of living at some point in the future. But in 1971, all of those rules, they were wiped out and thrown away. The rules literally changed. Under the gold standard, the dollar's value was anchored. It was anchored, and new money could only be created as fast as gold reserves grew. That restraint, well, it kept inflation in check and prices relatively stable. But once the tether was cut and the Fed and the government were freed from those limitations, they could print at will, financing endless spending, endless desires, without directly raising taxes on Americans. Inflation, well, it became a hidden tax now, one you never have a vote on, but always end up paying. From 1971 all the way to 1999, inflation became a permanent feature of American life. Every year, things just got more expensive. You can see on the Consumer Price Index chart, the CPI, the government's official scoreboard for reporting inflation, it shows a steady climb upward. During this 30-year period, the average annual inflation rate was 5.2%. At that pace, the cost of living, it doubled roughly every 14 years. What had once been stable, the dollar, suddenly turned into a slow but relentless erosion of purchasing power. As Americans saw their futures being taxed indirectly because of rapid rises in prices, the government began to step in and try to control the narrative by manipulating what was used to calculate inflation. CPI has been a moving goalpost. Now, this is the government's standard. This is what they report the inflation to be, and they've changed this standard over and over and over again. Because here's the problem. If inflation is now baked into the system, the people footing the bill, the American worker and saver, couldn't be allowed to see the full extent of it. So the scoreboard itself has been rewritten. The government doesn't just report inflation, it defines it. And over time, that definition has been quietly reshaped, not to reflect reality, but to control the story, the narrative. This is the ultimate form of control. When those in power can get you to distrust your very own experience, they are winning. Because you watch groceries climb higher. Gas, it eats more out of your paycheck. Rent consumes more of your income. Yet you're told inflation is low. It's stable and it's under control. How do they pull all of this off? Well, they do it by changing the rules of the game. The first one is called the substitution effect. If steak gets too expensive, well, the CPI assumes you just naturally switch to chicken, even though you still want steak. This allows the CPI to report not a rise in price, but just a change in preference. The next one is hedonic adjustments. If your laptop costs the same, but has more processing power, CPI says it actually got cheaper, even though you spent the same dollars on that laptop. The third one is basket changes. Items that rise too fast in price, well, they can just be swapped out. And this diminishes and mutes the appearance of inflation. What began as a simple measure of your cost of living, it became a weapon of perception management, a scoreboard rewritten to control the story. CPI doesn't reflect your reality. It reflects the reality that they need you to believe. And the cruelest trick of all is you don't just lose your money, you lose your grip on reality itself, doubting your own eyes as the prices of everything rises around you and they tell you you must be crazy. That's not really happening. Now this is where the story takes yet again another twist. From 2000 onward, the official story is that inflation has been tame, about 2.5% a year. But ask any family struggling with housing, healthcare, tuition, groceries, or gas if inflation feels like it's just 2%, and they'll laugh through their pain. Housing has quite literally doubled. Healthcare has nearly tripled, and college tuition, it's quadrupled. So if the scoreboard is fake, how do you measure the real damage? Well, first off, you don't look at the points that they print. You look at the money supply itself. Milton Friedman, maybe the last honest economist, nailed it decades ago when he said inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. The more money they print, the more value your dollars lose. Which brings us to the last 25 years. And the presidents who proved inflation isn't a glitch in the system, it is the system itself. This brings us to Act 5, Modern Wars, Presidents, and the Bill That's Coming Due. By the year 2000s, Americans, they had just accepted that inflation was just a now normal part of the healthy economy. This is what we're going to have to deal with. That's when the real game began, because once people stop resisting inflation, those in power, they can print as much money as they want, so long as they wrap it in a noble cause. And unfortunately, nothing sells like war. Since the Fed's creation in 1913, the US has been involved in some form of a declared or even an undeclared conflict, whether military wars or policy-driven wars on poverty, drugs, terrorism, and most recently COVID, for nearly 90% of the time. Each of these wars provide the perfect excuse for unlimited borrowing and money creation. The government gets to spend money unchecked and reckless because we're at war. The banking system, they get to collect the interest, and the American people, well, they pay the price. So we're gonna look at the last 25 years of money printing. We're gonna look at Republicans and Democrats alike, beginning with George W. Bush. George W. Bush, Republican from 2001 to 2009. In the Oval Office, he was fighting wars on terror, the Iraq War, plus massive bailouts during the 2008 financial crisis. Under President Bush, the money supply grew 69%, from $4.9 trillion to $8.3 trillion now in circulation. That was a 7.8% increase in the money supply every single year during his presidency. Barack Obama came in, a Democrat, from 2009 to 2016. Barack Obama funded wars on terror, the drone warfare, Libya and domestic wars, and the war on poverty and healthcare. Under President Obama, the money supply grew by 46%. He increased it from 8.3 trillion all the way to 13.3 trillion. On average, he printed 6% more money every single year he was in office. Then, miraculously, and who knows how, Donald Trump beat out Hillary Clinton. He came in promising to restore fiscal sanity. He was a Republican from 2017 to 2020, but at the tail end of his presidency, he fought the war on COVID, and he unleashed the most aggressive bailout to fight the war on COVID that has ever been introduced to the American economy. Under Donald Trump, the money supply grew by 46%. Now that's a little bit misleading because it's already so big. He grew it from 13.3 trillion to 19.5, but on average, he printed 10% more money during his 4-year stint in the Oval Office. Then Joe Biden came in, a Democrat, from 2021 to 2024. He continued to fight the war on COVID. He was also fighting the war on climate change. He had equity programs, and he started funding the war in Ukraine. Under him, the monetary supply grew by 6.2%, from 19.5 trillion to 20.7. Now, under President Biden, this was only 1.6 per year. The Federal Reserve had actually raised interest rates to slow down the printing of money because of the massive impacts of Donald Trump, the previous president, fighting the war on COVID. Now, in 2025, at the time of this video recording, Trump is now back in office. He just passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, and it's packed with spending wrapped in appealing slogans. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that it's going to add anywhere from $3 trillion to the debt and slash revenues by $4.5 trillion over the next decade. Now, what's going to actually come to fruition, I don't know, but it's more spending in the name of fancy slogans and fighting all kinds of wars, from wars on drugs to war on immigration, and who knows what war is next. The bottom line is, they're different parties, Republicans and Democrats, but they're running the exact same playbook. They print money, they spend money, and they kick the day of reckoning down the road, robbing America's future for consumption today. Since 2000, the money supply has exploded by 375%, from 4.6 trillion to $22 trillion. That's an average of about 6% per year. And my friends, this is what I want you to understand. That's the real rate of inflation. It's not the 2% that they're trying to convince you to believe. The Fed wants you to believe it's 2%, but we all know what's going on. They're printing on average 6% more money every single year. That's the real rate of inflation. So now the monster is fully revealed. From 1971 onward, Americans have lived in a system where real inflation has hovered between 5 to 6% annually. enough to cut your purchasing power in half every 12 to 14 years. If you've been alive since 1971, your cost of living has doubled 3 to 4 times. What used to cost $1 back then, it now costs $12 to $22 today. A 1971 dollar has just 12 to 15 cents of purchasing power left. The result is a $37 trillion national debt. That's $323,000 for every taxpayer just to break even. But this isn't just a number on a screen, it's a ransom. The monster doesn't just eat your dollars, it devours your future. And the bill will be collected one way or another, through higher taxes, more inflation, endless money printing, or whatever scheme that's cooked up between Washington, the Fed, and their friends at the big banks. This system is reckless and it's out of control. I saw endless wars not as noble causes, but as excuses to print more money. Wars we couldn't win, or in some cases weren't even real wars to begin with. I saw inflation not as an accident, but as theft. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. For a time, I'll be honest, I was angry. I felt betrayed. I felt helpless, disenfranchised, like the game was rigged and I was just another pawn in their game. But then came a turning point. I realized I had a choice. I still had my freedom to choose how I was going to react to the truth I had now confronted. I could remain a victim of the system, or I could become a victor within that system. Once I understood the rules of money, the path actually became very, very clear. Use their system against them, turn fake money into real assets, play their game, but win it for myself, my family, and those I can impact. And that realization I'm grateful for because it became my personal battle cry, to rise up and to live free. Knowledge is only potential power. It becomes wisdom when it's actually applied. And now I invite you to join me, to rise up, to break free, and to live free. All change ever experienced in the world, it actually comes from the bottom up. It's never enforced from the top down. America doesn't need another politician. We need a cultural revolution. And that revolution, it starts with you. You being empowered with money, knowledge, and the will to demand change. So here's the reality. The boom and bust cycle, it's here to stay. It's part of their business model. The monster won't be reformed because those pulling the levers, they can't stop. The system literally has to inflate just to survive. And the most dangerous thing isn't the lie, it's the truth that you choose to ignore. You've now seen the monster. You know its name, you know its history, and you know its playbook. And you can't unsee it. This creature doesn't sleep. It feeds every day you play its game. You can't kill it, but you can starve it. You can siphon back what it stole, and you can win. Now the mask is off, you see the monster clearly, and the only question left is this. Will that monster keep feeding on you, or will you rise up, take control, and turn its own rules against the monster that is chasing you down? Rise up, live free, and join me in chapter number 4.